Assalamu alaikum, students. So,
Welcome to sir.
this is our lecture number 36. This lecture is about life and works of T.S. Eliot and about his age. T.S. Eliot is a very important writer and probably the most important writer and poet and critic of 20th century. He is one of the writers who is equally known for his criticism and poetry both. As we have studied, we have just finished, Matthew Arnold's, the study essay, the study of poetry. He is also one of them who is equally known for his poetry and criticism both. So Matthew Arnold belonged to uh, Victorian era, and after Victorian era we have modern era, and modern era in modern era we have T.S. Eliot's name on the top of the list, at the top of the list, and he's equally known for his both criticism and poetry both work. So in this lecture I will tell you about his life, some important things regarding his life and works, एंड आई विल टेल यू अबाउट हिज एज. तो इसमें मैंने ज़्यादा आपके पास स्लाइड्स नहीं बनाई हैं, तो मैं आपको वैसे ही बताऊंगा. तो मैं चाहूँगा कि आप नोट करते रहें, उसको नोट डाउन करते रहें, और इसके अलावा ये वीडियो रिकॉर्ड भी हो रही है जिसको आप सुन भी सकते हैं. ठीक है, तो इन चीज़ों का जानना ज़रूरी है. ज़रूरी नहीं कि यू नीड टू मेंशन दिस थिंग इन योर आंसर, बट यू मस्ट नो अबाउट द राइटर, because T.S. Eliot is one of the writers who said that a writer is not a writer at all if he doesn't write about his age. So age is very important. As I told you, when we study any writer, so we must study three things. Number one, his life and his about his work to some extent, and number two, his age, and then the work which we are going to study. So ऐसा नहीं कि directly we start studying his work. So let's start. T.S. Eliot was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1888. He was born in 1888. And he received his degree from Harvard University, and he came to Europe to complete his studies. And because of the war, he stayed in England. Remember, he saw World War One and Two both. He is one of the writers who saw the destruction, the devastation, and you know the ugliness of World War One and Two both. So here you will find that he stayed in England. He was a, he stayed in England where he did low-paid work as a teacher and bank clerk while writing reviews of startling originality. Like many other young artists, he was helped and influenced at this time by Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound's name is very famous in this regard, and we know T.S. Eliot by his poem "The Wasteland." And remember, we should all be thankful to Ezra Pound. Because of Ezra Pound's advice, T.S. Eliot cut this poem to its half, यानी तकरीबन आधी पोएम उसने ख़त्म करके, जो हमारे पास अभी वर्जन है वो half of the real poem है. So the wasteland is the name of the poem. So he was helped and influenced at this time. He was helped and influenced at this time by Ezra Pound, and on whose advice he is said to have cut his most famous poem, The Wasteland. And this poem was published in 1922. In his youth, Eliot was understandably regarded as a rebel. अपनी नौजवानी की उम्र में वो एज अ रेबल रिगार्ड किया जाता था, बिकॉज हिज न्यू आइडियाज वर रेडिकल. रेडिकल मीन्स डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द एग्जिस्टेंट आइडियाज. So in his youth, he was considered to be radical, but he was always a sober nature. And with his conversion to Anglo-Catholic, और बाद में उसने अपना कन्वर्ट हो गया था, उस कन्वर्जन से भी उसमें बड़ा फर्क आया. तो इसीलिए कहा जाता है कि वट एवर ही रोड बिफोर 19 आई थिंक 27, whatever he wrote before 1927, it does not have religious touch. But whatever he wrote after 1927, it is something that includes religion at all cost. यानी कि उस जो उसने शायरी और क्रिटिसिज्म 1927 के बाद लिखी, तो इसको so in his youth, Eliot was understandably regarded as a rebel because his new ideas were radical, but he was always of a sober nature. Nat- He was always of a sober nature, and I have just mentioned that he converted to Anglo Catholicism in 1927, and his professorship of poetry at Harvard in 1932. He became a highly respected. He became a highly respectable, and he became a highly respectable and respected figure, giving talks on religion and culture, and as a director of Faber and Faber, doing much a number of verse plays. So he died in 1965. He died in 1965. So keep in your mind that he is the one who experienced both World War One and Two. He is the one who experienced both World War One and Two. And in the light of World War One and Two, first World War One and then second World War Two, he wrote his works, and he is the one who was not following religion properly before 1927, but after converting to Catholic, Anglo-Catholic Catholicism, he started writing, and whatever he wrote, it does not leave the subject of religion. His when Eliot began publishing poetry, Victorian Romanticism was at its last grips, means it was ending, it was dying. So Eliot, both by personal inclination and for both by personal inclination and for what he sensed to be the needs of the time, reacted sharply against 19th century English poetry and its criticism. So Eliot is the one who sharply reacted against the 19th century English poetry and its criticism. He was not happy at all because he did not agree to the definition of poetry which romantic writers gave. That poetry is a spontaneous outflow of powerful feelings. So he did not agree to it. In his reviewing, he asserted the excellence of half-forgotten 16th and 17th century writers. He is the one who revived them. And most importantly, we should remember then that he is the one who revived uh, metaphysical poets, who revived metaphysical poetry and who found or discovered the real worth of metaphysical poetry, which had been forgotten for almost more than 200 years. Irony is probably the most pervasive characteristic of his early London's poems, and not only the ironic wit of the 17th century metaphysical, but also a modern, impudent, allusive irony derived from the French symbolist we can found in his works. Our, T.S. Eliot's poetry becomes more earnest and broadly philosophical. The Wasteland, certainly a philosophical comment on 20th century society. It tells us about 20th century society, especially the first half of 20th century or first quarter of 20th century. The spirit of the Wasteland seems pessimistic when we read his poem The Wasteland, so we feel it as it is pessimistic, but its message is one of the exhortation to better things. Then you'll find his work Ash Wednesday, quartets. These are the poems firmly based in Christian faith, जो क्रिश्चियन फेथ को पर जिनकी बुनियादें हैं, एंड द ऑलवेज ऑफ somber काइंड. Remember, Eliot is definitely a difficult poet, and the more irritating for this because the difficulty is often quite deliberate. और वो डिफिकल्टी ऐसी नहीं है कि वो उसने उससे गलती से हो गई होगी, वो डेलिबरेटली डिफिकल्टी क्रिएट करता है. और एक दफ़ा किसी ने उससे पूछा इस हवाले से, उसने कहा माई जॉब इज़ टू राइट पोइट्री एंड द जॉब ऑफ क्रिटिक्स इज टू इंटरप्रेट पोइट्री. तो उसने कह दिया कि मेरा काम तो पोइट्री लिखना है, जबकि क्रिटिक्स का काम है इसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन करना. तो आप उनसे जाके पूछें. It is important not to make difficulties for ourselves, particularly in early readings of poetry. The clever critics should be left alone, at least for a while. This is what T.S. Eliot says. Take things, if you talk about Eliot's work, so we can find that his T.S. Eliot's literary production spreads over 45 years. तकरीबन 45 साल तक वो इस domain में रहा, and he wrote poems, plays, literary and social essays during this long period. He also worked as a journalist and editor. His writings may be divided into three heads. We can divide his writing in three categories: poetry, drama, and prose. He is also considered to be the one who revived poetic dramas, which were being written in Renaissance, in the Renaissance. The first period of T.S. Eliot, can be marked from 1905 to 1909. From 1905 to from 1909. The poems of this period are immature and mere schoolboy exercises. Again, the first period we can mark from 1905 to 1909, and the poems of this period are immature and mere schoolboy exercises. इतनी इसमें ज़्यादा मेच्योरिटी नहीं है. एंड दीज पोएम्स शो साइंस ऑफ पोइटिक टैलेंट. लेकिन उन पोएम से आपको लगेगा कि वाकई ये कोई बड़ा शायर है जो आने वाले दिनों में हमारे सामने आने वाला है. दे वर पब्लिश इन द वेरियस कॉलेज एंड स्कूल मैगजीन्स. Then comes the second period, and the second period is Profrock and other observations. 1917 से शुरू होता है. So the most significant poem of this phase are as follows: The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Portrait of a Lady, The Preludes. Then comes the third one. 1917 का year था ये. Second period, third period 1918 to 1925. 1918 to 1925, and this is probably the most important. This is probably the important period for him, and the most important poems of this period are as follows. The most important poems of this period are Gerontian, Burbank with a Baedeker, Sweetney Erect, A Cooking Egg, The Wasteland in 1922, The Hollow Man 1925. The fourth period begins from 1925 and ends 1935 roughly, and it is called the period of Eliot's Christian poetry. और यहाँ से आप क्रिश्चियन पोइट्री शुरू हो जाती है एलियट की, जिसमें मज़हब का एलिमेंट डोमिनेट करता है. So it is called the period of Eliot's Christian poetry. The following are you will find the significant poems of this Christian period, like Ash Wednesday 1930 published, Journey of the Maggie, Animila, Marina, Chorus from the Rock, Coriolan. A number of minor and unfinished poems are also there. Then comes the fifth period, and this period of Eliot's religious poetry is distinguished with the previous Christian poetry. So it is the period of fourth quartets, which were published as follow. We can read like Burnt, Norton, East Cocker, The Dry Salvages. So you can see that Eliot's poetry can be divided into 5 periods. And then comes drama, and in drama you will find, his poetic dramas are, like The Rock, pageant play, Murder in the Cathedral, both mashhoor play in 1935. It was staged. The Family Reunion, The Cocktail Party. Eliot's prose was published in the form of articles and essays in the various periodicals and journals of the day. So the following are the literary essays which are highly admired because of their critical pronouncements. तो उनमें आपके पास जो है, एक जो अभी हम पढ़ रहे हैं, notes, the use of poetry and the use of criticism, the idea of Christian society. Notes were the definition of culture. It's about culture. Selected essays, इनमें से एक हम अभी इस वक्त पढ़ रहे हैं, that is, you know, that we are going to study inshallah in the next one, and that is tradition and individual talent. ये आपके पास tradition and individual talent, this is the essay which we are going to start inshallah, and which we will do in two classes. And then function of criticism, the English metaphysical poets and the frontiers of criticism. He was also a renowned editor of the magazine named the Great Criterion, which was in circulation from 1922 to 1939. और ये मैगजीन जो था क्लोज हो गया था बिकॉज ऑफ द आउटब्रेक ऑफ वॉर इन यूरोप. जब यूरोप में जंग अजीम दोम का स्टार्ट हुआ, तो उस वक्त ये जो मैगजीन था वो बंद हो गया था, एंड ही हैड बीन द एडिटर ऑफ दिस मैगजीन. So this is what we have about his, life and works. So if we talk about his age, अगर हम इसकी एज की बात करते हैं, so we can find that the age of Eliot was definitely very complex and tough. These are the characteristics of his age. Any question? If you have any question regarding his life and work, you can ask me. चंद एक
No, sir.
चंद एक चीज़ें जो एलियट के बारे में बहुत ज़रूरी है वो बता दी मैंने आपको, दोबारा रिपीट कर रहा हूँ. एलियट is one of the poets, one of the writers who is equally known for his poetry and criticism both. As we have just finished Matthew Arnold, so Matthew Arnold was also one of the writers who was equally known for his poetry and prose both. Eliot is probably the biggest name in the history of English literature of 20th century. He is renowned for his poem The Waste Land. He is renowned for his poem The Waste Land. Eliot was also not only a literary critic, but he was also a social critic. The Waste Land, the poem which he has written, gives us a very good, you can say, idea, or it gives us a very good glimpse of the people of that particular time and of the mindset, of the anxiety of that particular time. And that poem was published after World War One. Eliot is one of the writers who saw World War One and Two both, and he was a Nobel Prize, author or writer, poet laureate. Now let's talk about his age. Remember, according to Eliot, a great poet in writing of himself writes of his age. Eliot says a great poet writes about his age when he writes something or writes, of himself. So it means that his poetry is deeply influenced by his age. अगर आप इसकी पोइट्री को पढ़ना चाहते हैं, समझना चाहते हैं, सॉरी, पढ़ना तो पढ़ने से मुराद समझना चाहते हैं, so you must study his age. If you don't study his age and you start studying his poetry or reading his poetry, so you will not be able to understand his poetry. His poetry is very difficult from this point of view that he writes about his age. और मैंने आपसे कहा था कि किसी ने उनसे सवाल किया तो उन्होंने उसके जवाब में कहा कि my job is to write poetry and it is critics job to give interpretation of what I write. It's not my job. तो उनसे आप जाके पूछो. So his poetry is deeply influenced by his age. All social, political, economic, and literary tendencies of this age exercise a tremendous influence on him. Political, social, economic, and literary, ये सब चीजें जो थी, they have great impact on him. The social situation in which he was born reflects in the tone of his poetry. It is an accepted fact that T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, is the epic of the modern age. T.S. Eliot की जो poem है Wasteland, I don't know whether you have studied this poem or not, or you are going to study this poem. It is the epic of this age. And what is epic poem or epic poetry? You must know about it. तो इसको इस मॉडर्न एज का एपिक कहा जाता है एंड इट प्रेजेंट्स अ वेरी क्लियर एंड ट्रांसपेरेंट पेनोरामा ऑफ द anarchy prevailing in the so called contemporary civilization. Now, these are the characteristics which we can find in the poetry of T.S. Eliot's in T.S. Eliot's age or T.S. Eliot's in modern poetry. First thing that we find is T.S. Eliot migrated to England in 1914. So the social and cultural background of Britain. Remember, T.S. Eliot was born in America, so he migrated to England in 1914. Over there, he stayed, and then World War started. I think, and he could not go back. The social and cultural background of Britain and other European capitals influenced him immediately. The World War One had great forces which could not be controlled, unleashed forces. The world suffered a furious succession of horrors and lust. Furious succession यानी कि बड़ी भयानक किस्म की बर्बादी वर्ल्ड वार वन ने लाई। और आप लोगों को एक चीज़ का तो पता भी नहीं होगा, मैं अभी आप लोगों को याद बताना चाहता हूँ कि वर्ल्ड वार वन के फौरन बाद या हो सकता है वर्ल्ड वार वन के एंड में ये जो आज हमारे यहाँ वबा आई हुई है, द काइंड ऑफ एपिडेमिक पेंडेमिक वी हैव, दैट पेंडेमिक also occurred in by the end of World War One, and it is said it was also a flu virus, and people were suffering from this virus, and within 2 to 3 years more than 5 crore, what do we call 5 crore, क्या कहेंगे 5 crore को?
Million, sir?
50, yeah, 50 million भाई, ये जो 50 million यानी कि आई थिंक मेरे ख्याल से 5 से 8 करोड़ लोग इस फ्लू से जो है वो मर गए, मतलब इंतकाल कर गए। और इसको स्पेनिश फ्लू का नाम दिया जाता है। आप थोड़ा नेट पे टाइप करके देख लीजिएगा स्पेनिश फ्लू। तो लोगों को पता ही नहीं था कि ये एक वायरस है, अननोन वायरस है, नोवेल वायरस है, एंड दैट हैज़ अटैक देम। उसकी वजह पता है क्या? उसमें नौजवानों की डेथ ज़्यादा हुई थी। व्हाट वाज द रीज़न बिहाइंड दिस? Because they all were anxious, they all were sad, depressed, disappointed, destroyed mentally, morally. They were, you know, उनकी हालत बहुत बुरी थी। जंग अजीम ने उन लोगों को, मतलब कोई किसी का बाप मर गया तो किसी के घर वाले बिछड़ गए, मतलब घर तबाह हो गए, और सब डिप्रेशन में थे। तो क्या उनकी इम्यून सिस्टम बहुत वीक हो गया था, और जब उनका इम्यून सिस्टम वीक था तो उस वजह से क्या हुआ, और नौजवानों में ये कसरत अक्सरियत नौजवानों की डेथ हुई थी। तो नौजवान ही ज़्यादा लड़ने के लिए जाते हैं, फौज में नौजवान थे, तो उनकी इम्यूनिटी वीक थी, और इम्यूनिटी वीक होने की वजह से वो इससे सफ़र करके उनकी डेथ हो जाती थी। तो एक एस्टीमेट के मुताबिक 5 से 10% लोग, तकरीबन 10% के करीब लोग जो हैं वो इस बीमारी, इस वायरस के की नज़र हुए। और दुनिया की मेरे ख्याल से 1/3 पॉपुलेशन जो होती है वो सफ़र उसने दे हैड दैट वायरस, एंड 10% आई थिंक पीपल डाइड। आज तो जो हमारे यहाँ रेट है इसका मोर्टेलिटी रेट वो बहुत कम है। इट इज़ आई थिंक नॉट इवन, and today we have proper estimation as well, so it is not even 2%, but it was 10%। और बहुत हैरत की बात है कि 5 से 8 करोड़ लोग, और कुछ जगहों पे तो ज़्यादा बताया जा रहा है और साइट्स पर। So this was also there, and all these things left a great, unleashed impression upon T.S. Eliot. So these were the actually outcomes of World War One. So the world suffered a furious succession of horrors and lust. There was anarchy and loss of faith in the existing values. People stopped, many people stopped having faith in existing values. और बहुत से लोगों ने जो, मतलब morally वो corrupt हो गए, और उन्होंने जो values थी उन पर मतलब ये कि अमल करना छोड़ दिया। Yeats has sum up, and then you will find some critics call it an age of disintegration and anxiety. age of disintegration and anxiety. Industrial chaos due to migration of labor from rural areas created abnormal conditions of living for the lower classes. Lower classes के लिए जीना बहुत मुश्किल हो गया था. The isolation and loneliness of the individuals in the modern towns have no compensation in the development of individual talents. So loneliness बहुत आम हो गई थी, isolation बहुत आम, लोग isolated घूम रहे होते थे, loneliness बहुत आम हो चुकी थी. मैंने कहा ना, किसी का कोई जंग की नज़र हो गया, किसी का कोई जंग में मारा गया. So they all were depressed. The ruined cities and shattered herds aftermath of the First World War needed colossal efforts of reconstruction. तबाह हो गए थे, घर तबाह हो गए थे, और बहुत मतलब ये कि they were in deep trouble. The moral chaos arising out of the violence and destruction caused by the war could not be replaced by the new system of values. Morally भी बहुत लोग corrupt हो गए, चोरी, गलत काम, ये चीज़ें आम हो गई थी, लोग frustration का शिकार हो चुके थे. Then you will find the movements of the women's liberty. एक नई चीज तहरीक उभरना शुरू होगी कि they started, women's liberty, feminism, that is called the women movements of the women's liberty and free mixing of both sexes. These things also became common, shattered any pretension to the decency, and you will find that people also became morally corrupt. इस तरह से लोग जो थे morally भी corrupt होना शुरू हो गए. Then you will find it is also called the age of new ideas. The revolution of Russia of 1915 marks the emergence of communism. Marxism was a guarantee for social and economic justice. So the people expected much from new social order. Many countries in Europe were gradually influenced by the ideas of Marxism. The ideas of Marxism were becoming common. फिर आप देखेंगे scientific achievements in different fields showed the way for improving the conditions of society. New physics, particularly the theory of relativity by Einstein, opened a new vistas for mankind. Then literary writers tried new experiments in the stream of consciousness. मैंने आपको गालिबन पढ़ाया था पिछले साल stream of consciousness novel. The advance in psychology and especially researches of Freud and Jung showed the complexity of human. These things show the complexity of human personality. Language became a body of pictures and images. Language became a body of pictures and images. Myths and symbols were exploited. Myths or symbols को exploit करना शुरू कर दिया writers ने. And all these things led to a new type of literature, और इन तमाम चीज़ों ने एक नई किस्म की literature को जन्म दिया, और T.S. Eliot उसमें एक ज़बरदस्त example है हमारे पास. So it is the age of new ideas as well. Then it is said that they were searching for new values. The pessimism, as I told you, modern age, especially this period, is something that is called pessimistic period. The pessimism and despair produced by the Great World War made thinkers look for a set of values. They started looking for new values which could bring improvement and reform them. फिर क्या हुआ? Nationalism and imperialism received a great jolt. Nationalism and imperialism, they received a great jolt. The new philosophy which became popular was that of socialism and internationalism. फिर उसके बाद उन्होंने nationalism और imperialism से अपने आप को छुड़वाकर वो they started getting away from these both, and they started accepting socialism and internationalism. Internationalism is to give respect to other countries as well, to have good relationship with other countries as well. So this is what socialism and internationalism. It was realized that relations between nations should be based on qualities, dignity and mutual respect and cooperation. फिर इनको समझ में आया कि हम दूसरे ममालिक के साथ जो अपने ताल्लुकात रखें इक्वालिटी पर, रिस्पेक्ट पर एंड कोऑपरेशन पर, इंस्टेड ऑफ कमर्शियल एंड ट्रेडिंग इंटरेस्ट. Then the establishment of the League of Nations, which was later replaced by UNO, it also indicated that international understanding and cooperation could provide the basis for lasting world peace. तो उन्होंने फिर क्या किया? पहले लीग ऑफ नेशंस को एस्टेब्लिश किया, फिर वो बाद में दूसरी जंग अजीम के बाद यूएनओ में तब्दील हो गया. So why it has been made? Because they wanted to give respect and they wanted all the nations should be given respect. So it is also called the age when in which people were searching for new values. एक चीज जो मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूँ, there was also a revolution in mass media. There was also a revolution in mass media. So, with the growth of literary and automatic printing press, key books and magazines became very popular. So, there was also a revolution in mass media, and printing press and key books, their magazines became very popular. As such, quality declined as compared to quantity. Quantity बढ़ गई और quality कम हो गई. There were other means or other sources of mass media like the cinema, radio, television. They were all exploited for commercial and entertainment purposes. As we can see today, these all sources are employed for commercial and entertainment purposes. ये सब जो है commercial और entertainment purposes के लिए exploit हो रहे हैं. Human relationships, ये सबसे अहम चीज़ है जो आप जहन में रखिएगा. Human relationships became coarse and vulgar. The lowering of public taste left its mark on literature, third class literature, the detective stories, comics. Then you'll find, sex magazines, pot boilers, blue films. These things further relate to the decline of public morality and public taste. तो ये बात आप लोगों की समझ में आई.
Okay. Yes, sir.
ये 20th सेंचुरी जो है ये बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स टाइम पीरियड इन द हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंग्लिश लिटरेचर, नॉट लिटरेचर बट ऑल्सो इन द हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंग्लिश द वर्ल्ड. और मैं आपको पहले ही बता चुका हूँ, अगर आपको याद हो 20th सेंचुरी का जब हम पढ़ रहे थे तो उसमें मैं आपको बहुत सी चीज़ें बता चुका था. ठीक है, तो चूंकि वो पहले एक साल पहले की था इसलिए मैंने कहा थोड़ा सा रिपीट कर दूं. तो टीएस एलियट की पोइट्री तो समझना और टीएस एलियट का काम समझना ही मुमकिन नहीं है इफ़ यू डोंट नो अबाउट हिज एज. क्योंकि उसने तो यही कहा है कि उसने कहा है कि राइटर इज़ नॉट अ राइटर इफ़ इट डजंट राइट अबाउट हिज एज. तो अपने एज के बारे में ही वो लिख रहा है. इसीलिए तो उसने रोमांटिक राइटर्स को डिस्कार्ड कर दिया एंड ही हैज़ नो रिस्पेक्ट फॉर देम बिकॉज दे डिडंट राइट अबाउट देयर एज. दे जस्ट टॉक अबाउट नेचर नेचर नेचर. सो रेवोल्यूशन इन मास मीडिया, और वही चीज़ आज काफ़ी चीज़ें, उनमें से काफ़ी चीज़ें आज आप इस दुनिया में भी देख सकते हैं. यू कैन फाइंड maximum things in today's world as well. Revolution in mass media is doing what? You'll find here people are losing their morality. They are getting away from education. They are accepting those things which are nothing to do with, which have nothing to do with real life. Physical exercises, physical activities are no more, and you'll find people are busy with those things which have nothing, which are harmful for to or injurious to our health. Human relations you will find are not given importance. आजकल कई केसेस में तो मैंने यहाँ तक देखा है कि किसी का इंतकाल हो जाता है, वो फेसबुक पे दे देता है कि मेरी दादी का इंतकाल हो गया, वहीं पे लोग ताजियत कर रहे हैं. भाई घर जाने की ज़रूरत ही नहीं है उनकी ना. इस तरह के भी आपको कॉन्टेक्स्ट मिलेंगे, नज़र आएंगे कि लोगों के पास टाइम ही नहीं है कि वो 2 3 3 दिन जो है दुआ के लिए जो है एक छोटी सी गैदरिंग कर लें. ऐसा भी नहीं है, वो फेसबुक पे सब कुछ हो रहा है. दुआ कर लो, वो फेसबुक पर हो गया, इस तरह से मतलब. सो दिस इज़ द रेवोल्यूशन इन मास मीडिया. फिर उसके बाद different isms हैं. There are different philosophies like symbolism, imagism. So symbolism was a literary movement which began in France early in the 20th century. And by symbolism, we mean that every physical and natural object may represent an intellectual or moral idea. For example, the rock, strong and rock जो है represent क्या करता है? Strong and steadfast. इट इज़ अ सिंबल फॉर इन्होंने सिंबल बना दिया गॉड के लिए. और चर्च और लव. द रॉक कैन ऑल्सो स्टैंड फॉर समथिंग डिफरेंट. तो इस तरह से यू विल फाइंड इजम्स. इमेजिज्म का भी आपको मिलेगा. द मूवमेंट वाज लेड बाय टी हलमे एंड एजरा पाउंड. Then you will find here not of revolt. Revolt. Modern poets react sharply to the romantic preoccupation with nature and real situation and ordinary characters. They revolted against them. They did not accept things as they were. They revolted against them. They also dislike a colorful and expensive decorated poetic style. Moreover, the impact of industrial civilization and revolutionary discoveries provided a fund of floating knowledge. यानी कि ये जो इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन सिविलाइजेशन था और रेवोल्यूशनरी डिस्कवरीज थी, इनसे भी उनको बहुत कुछ मिला. मेटर. Our complex civilization refined the sensibilities of both the readers and the poets. And that is why the modern poets became much different from their predecessors. इसीलिए बहुत different है ये अपने पिछलों से. TS Eliot writes in this connection. वो क्या लिखता है? TS Eliot क्या लिखता है इस हवाले से? Our civilization comprehends great variety and Our civilization comprehends great variety and complexity, and this variety and complexity, playing on a refined sensibility, must produce various and complex results. The poet must become more and more comprehensive, more elusive, more indirect, doing violence to the syntax in order to force to dislocate, if necessary, language into his meaning. तो ये टीएस एलियट लिखता है अपने एज के बारे में. Indirectness. Modern poetry is indirect and dramatic. Modern poetry is indirect and dramatic. Why? Because images and symbols heighten the power of the language. इसमें आपको images और symbols का बहुत ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल मिलेगा. आपने 1984 पढ़ी होगी ऑफ जॉर्ज ऑरवेल. एनिमल फार्म भी उसकी पढ़ी होगी. वो दोनों, these are both novels, and you can see how symbols are used over there. टीएस एलियट की पोएम ये वाली आपने पढ़ी नहीं तो पढ़ लीजिएगा, आपको लाजमी आपके कोर्स में होगी ये. So you can see how images and symbols have been used and how they heighten the power of the language. Literary devices like pun, paradox, irony, mock heroic, juxtaposition, they all made poetry subtle, complex and indirect. इन चीज़ों से poetry जो आप direct नहीं indirect हो गई है, indirectly criticize कर रही है. Moreover, some poets use the dramatic monologue. Some poets use dramatic monologue which reveal the inner work of the mind and its conflict. And in novel, in fiction world, you will find the stream of consciousness technique. इससे क्या हुआ? This also made their poems and of course, work, prose work difficult to understand. Besides these symbols and images, along with their diverse meanings and economy of phrases, rendered the reader very confused. फिर मजीद इसमें क्या है? फ्रीडम ऑफ ग्रामर एंड सिंटेक्स. बहुत सी जगह पे आप देखिएगा फ्रीडम ऑफ ग्रामर मीन्स दे हैव आल्सो वायलेटेड द रूल्स ऑफ ग्रामर. So freedom of grammar and syntax and telescoping words and thoughts, do all these things aid to the confusion of the reader, जिससे reader बहुत ज़्यादा confuse हो जाता है. फिर आपको मॉडर्न पोइट्री में compactness मिलेगा, बहुत कुछ एक ही उसमें आपको भरा हुआ मिलेगा. So the extension of knowledge to which the poet is here makes room into the different fields of collecting his ideas and images. He imposes on such diverse material a compact of a single poem. A poet organizes material and adjusts different elements and similar images to give an impression of unity. Sometimes different moods and attitudes have to be materialized and brought together into a single focus. So you'll find that, in a sense, modern poetry mean not for the masses but for the classes. तो आपको लगेगा जैसे ये पोएट्री कुछ क्लासेस के लिए, आम लोगों के लिए नहीं है. You'll find again a very important characteristic of modern poetry, and that is modern literature, realism. The modern poet, discarding the decadence of romantic tradition, looks up to realism. Realism की तरफ उसकी नजर है as the raw material of his poems. The habit caused by the First World War has led to a reflection in the meaning and purpose of life. Even science and new forms of government